The 2016 academic calendar has come to an end. Many students within the basic education sector wrote their last exams today. Matric students around the country now await their fate. Tonight, we are joined by Department of Basic Education spokesperson Elijah Mhlanga to unpack the department's presentation to Parliament earlier today and its plans for 2016. Elijah, thank you so much for joining us. Now, this year, the Education Department of Gauteng introduced an online admission system. Obviously, with a new system, there's going to be people who are happy, people who've got complaints, and just unpack it for us, because it seems like there's been a lot of mismatching and people being admitted at schools where they are not, is not in their demarcation.
Well, that's correct. I think what we need to acknowledge is the fact that Gauteng has tried something to introduce a system to streamline the admission process in the province. And that was done because there was a lot of chaos that was taking place due to the high demand for spaces in Gauteng in particular. And that has resulted in the province deciding on coming up with a different approach to try help parents who want to enroll their children in schools in Gauteng. So
is it working?
It has worked to a large extent, but you know, there are two things. The first one is that you need to streamline the admission process to ensure that every learner gets space. But it doesn't deal with the demand for space. It doesn't create more spaces in school. All it does is to allocate learners to particular schools. But once a school is full, the school is full. What then should happen is that the district offices need to work very hard to try allocate learners to schools. And what then happens is that a parent will be sent to a school which they don't want to go to, a school which is most probably far away from where they live, and then they begin to raise all sorts of complaints, most of which are valid, by the way. So what you have in Gauteng is a problem of space, because everyone migrates from other provinces to Gauteng and Western Cape. As you correctly indicated in your intro, that there's over 120,000 learners who are yet to be given spaces in Gauteng, yes, and about 29,000 in the Western Cape.
So what are the interventions? What are the plans that the Basic Education Department has in place to ensure that with 120,000 children not knowing where they're going at this time of the year? It's very tricky. It
is very tricky. It's a challenge that we need to tackle, but our officials are working very hard to check those schools that are not full, to try allocate learners to those schools, because at the end of the day, each and every learner needs to be placed somewhere, because all the children need to go to school. But that's just solving the problem that we are facing now. What we need is a long-term problem. I mean, it's a long-term solution to the problem that we have. What we need to do is to make sure that we fix each and every school, make sure that each and every parent who has a child going to a school, you participate in the affairs of the school to ensure that every school is administered in an effective manner, to ensure that all parents have confidence in all schools, to ensure that people don't move from provinces to one which is perceived to have a good quality education, because at the end of the day, some of our rural schools have good quality education, but perception dictates otherwise. That's why people move from rural to urban areas.
Now, there have been allegations that multiple schools are flouting the department's admission policies, and as you mentioned earlier, that some parents or some children find themselves in schools that they don't really want to go to, or a bit far from where they live, or a bit far from where their parents work, which will be an issue of transport and other various issues that come into play. What is the department doing to ensure that these policies are adhered to by all public schools?
Well, it's an ongoing challenge. Once again, you know, it's one of those things that we need to try remind our officials to think about every time they receive forms from parents who wish to enroll their children to schools. They need to start with those that live near the schools, because that's what the policy dictates. And in many instances, you find that particular provision is not followed. So we need to remind our officials to make sure that when people submit their forms and can prove that indeed they live in that neighborhood, they need to be given priority. But you also have a situation where parents who live in other places find people who live near the school use their documents and apply. And you end up with a situation where that particular school is overcrowded. So that's misrepresentation. That cannot be allowed, because you are creating a crisis where in fact there shouldn't be one.
But how do you deal with that problem? Because we've seen in certain government schools, for instance, say for instance in the north, where a lot of parents work in the north and they drive by the schools, or the schools are probably about 5 kilometers from their offices, and they use either friends' addresses, as you mentioned. How do you mitigate that situation?
Well, that's another challenge. You know, the fact is that Gauteng attracts a lot of people from all over the place. So even if parents work near that school, if people have already applied and the school is full, there's nothing else that you can do. And the other challenge is that we don't have enough land in this province to build schools. That's why there's a shortage of schools where there should be schools. You can see that in terms of planning, things have not turned out the way it was thought about maybe 20 years or so ago, because all of a sudden you see Midrand growing in the way that it's growing. There's a huge population explosion in that area, but all that land is for residential purposes only. There's no space available for schools. So all those schools there are overcrowded. And when we say a school is full, we mean exactly that. If you insist that your child must go into that school for learning purposes, that school is going to be overcrowded. That's why we end up with mobile classrooms that even become full, because the other thing is that these schools are successful and they are perceived to be doing well. That creates a problem. And one of the things that we always say is that Gauteng talks about paperless environment, they talk about tablets and interactive whiteboards, and you advertise these things, but you are attracting people from other provinces while you think you're solving one problem. So it's one of those things that we really need to sit down and think about and see what it is really that we need to do. Because Gauteng has been handing over a new school for a month for the past 2 years, but that is not even solving the problem. So the demand remains very high.
Now, let's speak about the issue of providing water, electricity, sanitation to rural areas and suburban areas, semi-urban areas, where there were issues before. Has the department managed to solve those issues and give solutions to those issues?
Yes, to a large extent we have. You know, in 2013, November 29th, the minister gazetted the minimum norms and standards for school infrastructure delivery, and that became the national plan, which everyone now knows about in terms of what we need to do and at what pace and the targets that we need to meet as a department. The next thing that we needed to do was to find funding for that, because once the norms were gazetted, it meant that we needed to find the money to make sure that all these things are provided for within the limited period. So a lot of work has been done. I mean, in 2014, there were 474 schools which were identified to have never ever had any form of sanitation whatsoever. And by September this year, 408 of them had already been given these services, which means about 66 still needed to be attended to. But we know that different provinces are working hard to ensure that these schools also receive these basic services. So if you look generally at the work that has been done since 2013 up until now, it's actually much more than what has ever been done before, because now we have these norms and standards which force provinces to provide these basic services: water, electricity and sanitation.
Now let's speak about the Matric exam season, which I think is finally over, or it ended today. The final paper was today. A lot of issues, a lot less issues compared to the previous years. You know, does the department consider this year's Matric exam a successful one?
Absolutely. It was a success, because for the first time in the history of this country, we had over 800,000 matriculants writing. In fact, we had 827,324, which is a massive number, something that we've had to manage from the 26th of October until today. So it's a month full of anxiety, because we have thousands of officials that are involved in the process of distributing question papers to our 7,000 examination centers, making sure that all the 820-something thousand 60,000 candidates receive the correct question paper at the right time, all the time, to ensure that they write the correct subject, and 67,000 invigilators checking that everyone is doing the right thing. And that happened for a month. Of course, you know that in Limpopo there was a paper that leaked.
Yes.
An investigating team was put together. They've done an investigation. The Hawks are also helping us. We know that someone has since been arrested. They are looking for other people, and those people will also be arrested pretty soon. And that is helping us, because for the first time we are demonstrating that we are serious. We don't want any exam-related irregularities. Those that get involved in these things are going to be arrested. And we announced yesterday that the investigating team has decided that those learners that are implicated are not going to rewrite the
Yes.
paper. Instead, they need to be dealt with in terms of the regulations, which means they will go through the disciplinary processes, which means if some are found guilty, they will have to be banned from writing our exams for a year, 2, or a maximum of 3. And that's the punishment, unfortunately, if you get yourself involved in these things. But what we are going to do immediately is to do investigative marking, check if they had received other question papers, compare their marks, their performance during the year and the final exams, and then question them. Those that are guilty will be punished. Those that are innocent will be cleared and be given their results.
Now, Elijah, let's speak about the issue of educator shortages in schools. I mean, it's a huge problem, especially in our public schools, where everyone, as you say, wants to move to the urbanized areas, which is mostly Gauteng, the Western Cape, KZN towns with Durban, but it's everyone migrating from the rural areas. Or even with that migration, being in the urban areas, there's still shortages of teachers in schools, in public schools. How is the department addressing these shortages? And is this what what's the right word? The way that you're mitigating this situation? The academic year begins in January. A very short space of time to deal with that problem. How's the department handling that problem or that issue?
In fact, what you have is a situation where there's an oversupply in one area and an undersupply in another. The challenge is where you have an undersupply in critical subjects like mathematics, science, life sciences, business studies, economics, and accounting. Those subjects are in high demand. Also the African languages in particular. That's where we have challenges. We have an undersupply. But what you find is that a lot of our teachers, when they graduate, they want to go and teach in high schools. They don't want to go to primary schools. And now, as a department, we have created the Funza Lushaka bursary scheme, and one of the conditions is that you need to go back and teach at primary school at foundation phase, which is where the huge demand should be, in fact. And we've also conducted research to find out how many maths teachers and science teachers we have in the system, how old they are, and when they're expected to leave the education system. And we have now even partnered with Teach SA, who also bring us graduates who have qualified in various subjects and have received the necessary training to go and teach in those critical areas of shortage of our teachers. So we are doing quite a bit to try address this challenge. We also have district and community-based recruitment drives that we have, and we are glad now that the Department of Higher Education has also announced that NSFAS has been given more money, and we hope that a lot of those young people that want to enter the teaching profession will also be given funding over and above our Funza Lushaka bursary scheme, so that we try and produce more teachers who will come and teach, particularly in our primary schools, because we have more primary schools than high schools. We have only 6,600 high schools in this country out of the 25,000 schools that we have.
Wow. Is that enough?
It's not enough. We need more. In fact, that's why we were nervous when there were threats that the academic year couldn't be completed at university level, because we're fearing that our graduates that we expect to come into the teaching profession next year wouldn't be able to do so. So we're happy that exams have been written and that those who are completing will be able to come and teach, so that we can address other challenges other than teacher supply.
Just in the parting shot, plans to build more high schools?
Well, we are building more high schools because we are seeing the numbers increasing, as we were saying, that last year we had 801,000 matriculants writing. This year there was an increase by over 27,000. That means our high schools are now producing more learners, which means a lot more young people now are staying in the education system to complete their education. So that's a good sign. It means we need to create more spaces for them to receive their education.
Elijah, I wish we had more time, but we have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us. That was a basic education spokesperson, Elijah Mhlanga, joining us now live in studio. Now, in